Hey, gang. All right, I'm gonna look over. I read your comments on the introductory material to Autobiography we've read, and I just want to say a few things on that. So I'm going to turn the camera towards the text and talk about that for a few minutes. So stay tuned. Okay, we're back. So let me see if I can get that out of the way. Okay, here we go. I think we're on, right? Let me make sure we're on. Yeah. Okay. Okay, here we go. So, red meat, what difference did Stesichorus make? So this opening thing is sort of like almost like a critical review, as if she had an introduction in a scholarly text of Stesichorus, and she's questioning, his importance in the history of poetry. And but it's a parody, it's a joke to an extent. Though it turns out Stesichorus is a real guy. I'd never really heard of him, and I did look him up. He's a real guy, and some of the things she says here are true. Some of them aren't, I think. I'm not completely sure what is and what isn't, so I call this a pseudo intro or pseudo scholarship. She starts with a quote from Gertrude Stein. Gertrude Stein was a famous American she was a lesbian. She was wrote a lot of literature. She lived in the early modernist period of 1900s, and she wrote a lot of stuff that's really hard to understand. It's more like she plays with words, and a lot of stuff doesn't really, have much meaning. It's more of a sort of playing with words and sound. And she said, "I like the feeling of words doing as they want to do and as they have to do." So there's maybe a sort of a statement of the interest in words for themselves there. And then this is a kind of a funny thing. It says here, he came after Homer and before Gertrude Stein. Well, Homer wrote in the 800 BCs, and Gertrude Stein wrote in the early 1900s. So, and then she says, a difficult interval for a poet. Well, almost all the poetry we know in the history of Western civilization was written was written between Homer and Gertrude Stein. So that's a joke. Okay. So that's one thing I wanted to point out. And then a lot of you like this, that adjectives are latches of being. And she's comparing, she says, some of you commented on this. Of course, there are several different, make sure that's still working. Of course, there are several different ways to be. In the world of the Homeric epic, for example, being is stable. So Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. Those are the story. The Iliad's the story of the Trojan War, in which the Greeks went to Troy and to get back Helen, who had been stolen by Paris, the Trojan named Paris, Paris, not Peerris. and and then that's so the first one's the story of that, or a part of the story of it. Actually, it's about the story of the anger of Achilles. And then the second one is the Odyssey, and that's about Odysseus, who's one of the Greek warriors, and his 20 years away from home, 10 years in the war, and then 10 years sailing on the ocean trying to get back. The story of the Cyclops and some of that stuff is from the Odyssey. But the point she makes here is down here: Homer's epithets are a fixed diction with which Homer fastens every substance. And I think like every time he says the sea, he calls it unwearying. Or every time he mentions Poseidon, the god of the ocean, he says the blue eyebrows. And there's others. It's not always that, but there's like a few that go with Poseidon. Or Athena is often called gray-eyed. Or Odysseus is called wise Odysseus or wily Odysseus. So he always puts certain adjectives with certain characters or certain phrases, okay? And so then she argues that Stesichorus didn't follow Homer in that, and he would put he would put weird adjectives with the noun. So he would say that, call a river being root silver, or a child is bruiseless, things that sound a little odd. And I think this kind of ties into what her point is, that by releasing being, how when we were reading about the selections that said how poetry, excuse me, how poetry opens up, makes us see reality anew, makes us see, it breaks us out of habit. And I think that's kind of what this is getting at, that by being creative with adjectives, among other things, uh, we open up being, we open up the world to our experience by being able to re-see it. So I think she's talking about that. Okay, let's keep going. So so then we get these supposed fragments of Stesichorus, and again, I don't know how authentic these fragments are. I don't think they're completely authentic. I think they're actually made up by Anne Carson to some extent. So I need to look into that a little bit more because some of them definitely don't sound ancient to me. So some of you are saying, well, I didn't understand it. It seemed like a fragmentary and there's no punctuation. And so 2 points here. Yes, well, they're supposed to be fragmentary, whether they're real or not, and I don't think they're real. Oh, here's an example of why we know they're not real. Here's the word, the ticking red taxi. Well, they didn't have taxis back in Stesichorus's time, so we know that that can't be for real. But so she's kind of imitating it, and so it's a sort of a mix of the ancient and the modern, I think. And also, you may not know this, but ancient writing, Greek and Latin and some of the others, they didn't punctuate at all. And one of the reasons was they were often writing either on stone or on papyrus. So they wanted to jam as many letters together as possible because, it's hard to write something on stone and papyrus is valuable, so you don't waste any of it. And so she's kind of imitated. So in a way, it's very. I think this might tie in also with her discussion of between Homer and Gertrude Stein. I think Anne Carson is suggesting that in a way, modernist or more modern poetry and literature has more in common with ancient literature than it does with all the stuff that went in between. I don't know if she's quite making that claim, but there's an implication there. And one of the things is she does without punctuation, and that's very ancient. So you have to try to figure out for yourself where the sentences end. At least she does separate the words. In the old writing, they didn't even separate the words. Letters were all smashed together, and you just had to figure it out. So if I read this one here, that some of you wondered about, and I'm not saying I get it all. If you persist in wearing your mask at the supper table, well, I don't know. That maybe because he's a kid, you get the impression he's a kid, and kids run around with masks on. But there could be a deeper implication, that the mask is the persona we wear that we show other people. I'm not sure. So yeah, so then you're right. There's ... It's hard to say what's happening there. And then, well, good night, then they said, and drove him up. Why did they have to drive him up? And then some of you wondered about this. To the hot, dry arms, to the ticking red taxi of the incubus. Well, if you look up incubus, it's a male demon who tends to have sex with sleeping women. I don't know. In this case, the male demon would be having sex, I guess, in his sleep. I also looked it up. It can mean a nightmare. So I don't know. Gerion's going up to bed and having dreams of sex with the incubus. I'm not sure. Ticking red taxi. I'm not sure. Though the ticking makes me think of how the taxi meter goes on. I don't know if you guys know about that now that the days of Uber. And why it's red, I don't know, but we all know that red is an important color in this, right? Some of you talked about red as being passion, as being blood, and he's red. Jerian is red. So, yeah. And some of you said, "Man, I understand everything." Man, it's hard for me to believe you understand everything. Here's an example of one that who knows what the heck this is saying. I mean, I think what's fun is you try to make sense out of it, and maybe you can, but it's going to take some effort to make sense out of all of it. Gerion's dream began red. He dreams in red, then slipped out of the vat. The vat, I don't know, would that be his head? A vat is like a barrel, kind of like an open barrel. That's like when witches are going bubble, bubble, toil and trouble, and they've got that big stick that they're stirring. They're stirring in a vat, you could say, or you make things in a vat. So I don't know. His dream got out of the vat, whatever that is, and ran up sail. Well, now that's kind of a sailing term. Is that like a sail going up the mast or something? Broke silver shot up through his roots like a pup. Oh, okay. I think I figured it out. Dare I say that he had a wet dream? Okay. So that the dream slipped out of the vat. The vat would be, where the semen is made inside his body, and up sail would be up his erect penis, and then broke silver, and that would be when he ejaculates. That's one possibility. Okay, that would make sense with the other part about the dream. Oh, actually later on. I don't know. So, but here's a dream. I'm going to pause there for a second to reorganize. See, I didn't think about that till I started talking about it right now with you.